graphics. When we click here, it first offered us the option of do an animation or a static plot. We're going to forget about animations right now. We're going to go for static plot and say OK. When we do that, then the command wxdraw 2D shows up. Okay. Now we need to select the next thing. When we click expression, that's for an explicit expression. This is for an implicit plot. This is for a parametric plot. So we're going to go for expression. Another possibility is to use points that describe the graph. We're going to deal with those later on. And so let's go for expression first. And we're going to enter this function s squared plus 1. And it says the variable is x starting from -2 to 2. I'm going to change that to -4 to 4 and say OK. For some reason it repeat this. This is what I wanted to show you. What you're doing is you're building up on this wxdraw menu, introducing the explicit expression, and then the cursor should be around here for the next step. The next step is to determine the diagram title. And let's gonna say the title is called sample graph. You can enter anything you want, sample graph. Say OK, and there's that line that says title sample graph. The next step is to indicate the range of x, and that is obtained when we do access. And when we do access, we can enter the title for the for the x label, which we say is time space seconds, and the range of x goes from -6 to 6. We're not going to do a range for y, but we do have a label for y, which is velocity and miles per hour. And we say OK. Then when we do that, our command starts growing up and is interfering with the next line there. So I'm going to put some spaces in there and move the cursor to the right of this parenthesis. I'll try this. I'm going to increase the spaces inside here and then take all this part, paste it here. That's the way it should be. And so you start building up this command, and then the next, we're going to put the cursor right here. The next step is the grid. And the grid simply says, put your grid in multiples of the tick frequency. That will be how often the numbers will show up in X and how often in Y. So let's put it in 1, 1, well, that's kind of the default. And so this command that you built here, it's what's going to produce your graph. I don't need these spaces, so I'm going to delete them. And click somewhere in there and do Shift Enter. Okay, it says invalid number of arguments 8. What is happening here is that I have this extra parenthesis there, I believe. Actually, the parenthesis should be right here after the comma. Now I produce my graph. So the reason why I made a mistake is because I keep clicking around the command. But if you do it in that order, you should be able to figure things out. And for example, the explicit ends with the expression explicit and the range of values of x for the plot. Then everything else comes separated by commas. And when I say range here, -6 to 6, means how much you're going to show in the x-axis. regardless of how much you calculated in the explicit expression. So that'll give you your graph, and you can copy that graph, save the image, etc. Or if you double click on it, no, actually if you click right here and it says pop out interactively, you can make a few changes in here. For example, zooming, toggle the grid if you want the grid on or off, and a few things like that. So I'm going to close that down here, and that's the graph. I'm going to try a second example, and this time in the place we're going to put the command, I'm going to put a lot of spaces and click over here, and we start with a 2D static plot, say OK, and then actually it began over here. So what I'm going to do is going to select that, do Control X, Control V, and put the cursor in between. There you go. And then we go for an implicit plot, which is going to be the expression x times sine of y plus y times sine of x. X between minus 10 and 10, and y between minus 10 and 10 also. And then there's an OK button down below here. And then Control V, and put the cursor in between. There you go. And then we go for an implicit plot, which is going to be the expression x times sine of y plus y times sine of x. X between minus 10 and 10, and y between minus 10 and 10 also. And then there's an OK button down below here. And then let's see, everything looks fine except that we have this extra parenthesis there. Yeah, well, we're going to continue and see what happens. We go for the diagram title, implicit plot example. And then we go for the axis, x label, x emitters, y emitters, x range from minus 12 to 12, minus 12. In this case, we do change that to minus 12 to 12. And then we go for the grid, and the grid we're going to use the standard 1-1. If I do control, now I get an error, and that's because of that extra parenthesis that I have right there. I'm going to take it out. Still not working. Oh, I am missing a parenthesis, an opening parenthesis here. Okay. So the way that this works, when you go clicking on these buttons, you start building your command. Now, if you think of it, you can put this command into a single line. Let me show you how. Except that for easiness of reading it, maximum puts all that in separate lines. I'm going to put it in 2 lines actually. Okay, so that's what you have. You have the wxdraw2d command, then a specification for the graph with values of x and y for an implicit case, a title, a label for x, a label for y, a range for x, range for y, and a grid. That's the basics. There's more things that you can add. But that is the command, oops, that produces these graphics. Let's try the parametric here. And I'm going to open this up and say 2D. OK. We'll go for parametric. And parametric is telling me x is 4, so you have to type here 4 times sine of t over 2 right arrow square. The y value is 3 times cos